So I'm here for about 20 minutes today to talk to you about RegTech. I'm conscious I've come along to a wealth tech day, and I'm now going to talk to you about RegTech. So I'll try and make it relevant where I can. I head up RegTech and Advanced Analytics at the FCA, a relatively new area of focus and a new department for us. So I'm going to talk about some of our activities that we're involved in. FCA Innovate, our sort of innovation-focused effort's been running for about 3 years now, has a number of limbs. The first, direct support, is basically our attempt to try and support new fintech and other businesses to enter into financial markets in the UK. We've seen about 1,000 firms go through direct support over the past 3 years. Sandbox, probably the next best well-known area of focus for us. So I think we're the first regulator in the world to have a regulatory sandbox. We've had several dozen experiments through that sandbox to date. We've just announced last week the 29 companies that are going to be in the 4th cohort for the sandbox. It's all on our website. Please take a look. And then we'll also open up for the 5th cohort later in the year. At the moment, we're also consulting on how to run a more internationally focused cross-border global sandbox. We were open to consultation a couple of months ago, so we're just considering all those responses at the moment and expect to hear something more on that in the coming weeks. The third limb is the main bit I'm going to talk to you about today, which is RegTech, both external RegTech focus, but also our adoption of modern advanced analytics technologies internally. Fourth, broadly just policy engagement work, so bits and pieces in terms of themed events, bringing groups together to discuss innovative topics, engaging and collaborating with international partners. We have a series of cooperation agreements with international regulators, for instance. That all comes under that fourth limb. And then the fifth is the advice unit. This is very much focused on robo-advice offerings. But today I'm going to spend most of my time talking about this one in the middle, RegTech and advanced analytics. So we're interested in 3 different forms of RegTech. The first is what you might consider kind of compliance technologies, so the application of modern technology to help firms meet regulatory compliance requirements. The second is effectively applying some of those technologies ourselves. In some markets, this is referred to as subtech or supervisory technology. We just consider it another stream of RegTech. And then the third is kind of a combination of these two, but it's basically saying if you had the technology, the data, the wherewithal that you have today, when you were creating some of these regulatory structures, would they look very, very different? So one of our streams of work that I'm going to talk about is more about re-engineering a regulatory system through technology rather than just applying technology for automation, which is really what the first two are more focused upon. I spoke at this last year, so I'm not going to repeat really what I said in too much detail, but just to give you a sense of the kind of roles we try and play when it comes to RegTech. The first sounds really benign. You'll still find many regulators around the world who struggle even with this first step, which is just to be part of the ecosystem, to be out talking to people, engaged in the market. We take that a bit further. We get involved in industry pilots and experiments. We engage a lot with established accelerator programs in the UK and beyond. And we do go out to the market and welcome input and discussion on topics that we're particularly interested in. The first being RegTech itself, and then the second within that was this concept of machine executable reporting I'll talk to you about in a moment. But this first role is basically being out and about, engaged, plugged into the ecosystem. The second role was basically kind of driven by market feedback to us that said, look, the most fundamental thing you can do is bring people together to work on common problems. You have a convening authority as a regulator. You should use it. So we see ourselves as playing this kind of catalytic convening role. We mainly do this through tech sprints, which are our version of hackathons. We've done 5 of these so far, of increasing scale and complexity. The last one just a few weeks ago on financial crime that I'll talk about briefly in a moment. Alongside these tech sprints, though, we bring a lot of people together in roundtables, tech talks as we call them, and other themed events. We had one recently on AI and machine learning and its application within financial markets in the UK. What are our expectations of explainability? How does governance apply in an AI world? That sort of thing. So this catalytic effort of bringing people together to discuss shared problems and to try and make some progress against those problems. Third role, pretty strong feedback actually that it's very unpalatable for a regulator to stand up on stage and say, you should all use this modern technology, go forth and conquer with all of these great new innovations, if we're not being seen to be a user and an experimenter ourselves. So actually most of what I'm going to spend the second half of this talk talking about is how we're using some of these technologies, because I think it's important that we're visible and transparent with how we're attempting to deploy them ourselves. So this third role of being an ambassador and a user, as I say, it has an experimental part, but it also I do a lot, frankly, trying to engage international regulators who are perhaps a bit less pro-innovation or pro-technology friendly, to try and understand the trends and try and get involved a bit more. We also have a role in educating the FCA internally. We're 3,500 people. We are not all technologists by any means. So we run these series of what we call techno events internally as well, to try and effectively raise the FCA's own understanding and capability when it comes to some of these technology trends. So they're the three roles we try and play: engaged participant, catalytic convener, ambassador and user. It's quite simple, but that's what we're attempting to do. I'm going to talk about two areas of focus for us with RegTech in this year. The first is digital regulatory reporting. We previously called it model-driven machine executable regulatory reporting, which didn't really roll off the tongue and confused the hell out of lots of people. Effectively, what we're experimenting with is, when it comes to regulatory reporting requirements, can they be written in a form that is fully unambiguous and could be directly interpreted and implemented by machine without any human intervention at all? That's kind of the exam question. So can you write reporting requirements in a way that doesn't require human interpretation and implementation? This basically span out of our second tech sprint and then got taken forward a lot further in our fourth one, the back end of last year. And we think broadly the technology exists to make this happen. You can write law in a machine-coded form. You can express it in a way that is unambiguous, fully interpretable by machine, based on open standards, based on open technologies, and you could strip out lots and lots of interpretation and implementation costs from doing it. So technologically it's feasible. What we haven't ascertained fully yet is whether it's economically viable, whether the liability transfers and things that might occur if we move towards this kind of regime are acceptable, whether firms welcome this innovation, et cetera, et cetera. So we've proved that the concept works technologically. We have recently closed a call for input. Got loads of responses, actually, several dozen responses, which for something this technical is a good number, to be honest with you. We had a call for input asking for views on technical governance, commercial and legal implications of a fully machine executable regulatory reporting regime. And we're now kicking off some pilots to take what was a very small, and I'll try and manage expectations here, a very small proof of concept at a tech sprint where we took a single reporting requirement. We're now looking at, can you scale that? We know the industry spends conservatively hundreds of millions, more likely billions, implementing regulatory reporting changes per annum. So there's a big prize to go after here for us in the industry in terms of cost efficiency. We also know that because the industry interprets our requirements broadly unilaterally, there tend not to be a whole lot of kind of concerted consortia type efforts, tends to be unilateral interpretation. We end up with a whole remit of different interpretations of our requirements, so we get data of varying quality back as a result. So there's a real opportunity for us in terms of getting higher quality data. There's a real opportunity for the industry in terms of saving cost, frankly, and reducing uncertainty. So we've got two pilots up and running now. We've got about 6 or 7 banks involved in both. They've just started last month. They'll run for about 6 months. We will be very public with the success or failures along the way. So even though there's a relatively small group that are actually involved, we will publish probably on a 2-weekly basis the outputs of those pilots. And we continue to welcome comment, critique or positive on whether this is a good thing for a regulator to be going after. So that's, I guess, priority number 1 when it comes to RegTech for us at the moment. The second, of equal importance, is AML and financial crime. So we had a tech sprint, a hackathon tech sprint event last month. When we started these events about 2 years ago, we had about 30 people involved. Our one last month had 270 software engineers, developers, user experience specialists, subject matter experts, and various others. About 270 people in the hackathon, and about another 400 for demo day and the final day of the hackathon. It's a really big, kind of industrial scale hackathon event that we convened last month. Because we're all going after a pretty big challenge here. So conservatively, the UN estimates 1.6 trillion of criminal proceeds being laundered through financial markets every year. When you think that's the proceeds of human trafficking, drug trafficking, modern slavery, and that some of that money is funding terrorism and other highly egregious secondary crimes, I think we've all got a part to play in trying to reduce that figure from 1.6 trillion to something slightly more palatable. And I think given the amount that we and you all spend on attempting to reduce money laundering, it's not like we're not trying, it's just we're not perhaps hitting the mark as much as all of us could. So we think there's a real opportunity for new technologies, but also for greater collaboration between market participants and between market participants and regulators to start to tackle this problem and this challenge. So as I say, a huge tech sprint last month. First one that we also invited international regulatory peers to. So we had representatives from the US Treasury, from the US Federal Reserve, various other federal agencies, United States, Asia Pacific regulators, Middle Eastern regulators, and various others, to really try and highlight this global challenge and this global problem that we face, and to look at how we can work together to solve that. So the tech sprint was last month. It's a great opportunity to shine a light on the problem and to see how technology can make some progress, but you only get prototypes at a tech sprint. You don't get anything more than a prototype. So we now have, I think it's about 6 or 7 of the teams going through more formal post-event acceleration through Level 39 and various other groups. So we'll see those ideas being taken forward over the next few months. We also see a number of kind of spin-off industry pilots and proof of concepts that we'll continue to be involved in. And we're talking to the international regulators to see what they will do in their jurisdiction to continue to kind of drive this momentum forward. It's quite hard post a hackathon to maintain momentum. You get a lot of excitement for a hackathon and then it kind of fizzles out if you're not careful. So through this mix of formal acceleration, industry pilots, and then more international dialogue, we hope to see this move forward again. So expect to hear more from the FCA and others on RegTech and financial crime focus in the year ahead. Just trying to see how I'm doing time. Okay. The other half of my role, so a lot of that is kind of external facing RegTech work. So as I say, participation, catalytic convening, and then this side of the house, using these technologies ourselves. We as an organisation have not deployed machine learning on scale for decades. You know, this is new territory for us. So I thought I'd tell you a little about some of what we're trialling at the moment. So, like many of you, we have a number of processes that are manual, task-heavy, that are paper-heavy, that are, frankly, somewhat less efficient than they could be. So we're trialling a number of things. We're looking at developing a chatbot interface for our contact centre. We receive about a third of a million contacts through our contact centre a year. That would be voice and text contacts from firms and consumers. We think there's a real opportunity to drive some efficiency out there and to actually provide a much better service than we're able to at the moment through just teeing up a chatbot to answer some of the most basic questions. So this is not going to be the cutting-edge, complex questions requiring a really advanced deep learning chatbot. This will be a fairly basic chatbot, but we'll hopefully see some efficiencies from that. We also have quite a challenge in that we supervise 58,000 firms, some of whom we know very, very well, some of whom we have relatively little contact with. We traditionally do that by forming firms into portfolios of what we consider to be similar firms, and then applying supervision on a risk and issue focused basis. So we do thematic reviews and things like that. With so many firms, it's really important that we get those portfolios right. So we're exploring how to use unsupervised learning to cluster firms more objectively into more appropriate portfolios for supervision. So again, driving out that human effort in working out which firms sit here and which firms sit there, and using unsupervised models for clustering firms. As I briefly mentioned as well, we have a lot of paper, like I imagine many of you do. We have a lot of paper and we do a lot of reading. So we're exploring how to use various forms of natural language processing, whether it be sentiment analysis, topic modeling, and other forms, to see what can we do to, again, realize some efficiencies in how we're reviewing documentation that you, the industry, provide us, and documentation that we get from elsewhere. So natural language processing is an area of focus for us as well. The second, so if the first was about process automation, the second driving use case for us is new insight. New insight, more timely insight about the 58,000 firms that we supervise. We can do this in various ways. So we're looking at how we use social media monitoring and social media network analysis to understand real-time trends and issues that are bubbling up. Noting that, of course, social media has its biases and doesn't cover all of the markets fully, but there's definitely a rich vein of information there for some of our firms. Linked to that, we are much more, we're exploring a lot more how to use network and graph analytics, particularly in the market abuse space. So many of you in the room will have recently been through the joys of implementing MiFID II. MiFID II realises a huge amount of new data for regulators, or order book data specifically. And there's a lot in there that we can leverage to identify networks of market abusers that was previously quite hard to detect, particularly cross-exchange market abuse. So we're looking at how we use network and graph analytics for that purpose. I've mentioned sentiment and topic modelling. And then another big area of focus for us is using new machine learning models for data quality monitoring and for anomaly detection. Either anomalies because it highlights something egregious, like market abuse, or anomalies in there it highlights poor quality data, poor submissions, which may actually belie an underlying conduct issue at a firm or a resource issue at a firm. So a lot of experimentation in that space as well for us. The next use case, so automation, new insights. The third, I guess, driving use case for us is to move from a descriptive understanding of the world to a more predictive understanding of the world. So using more particularly supervised machine learning models to develop better predictive models of misconduct and firm failure and harm in markets, as mentioned there. But also looking at one of the use cases we've got here is looking at trying to identify things like financial promotions that are likely to mislead people by their nature. So either in the way they've been structured and phrased, the way they've been marketed, the channels that have been used, et cetera, et cetera. So trying to predict some of these issues before they occur and therefore be able to intervene before the harm has crystallized. The fourth area for us is moving from a sampling-based view of the world to a population review. Impossible with human effort, actually not impossible with some of the machine learning algorithms we're now starting to use. So again, one of the areas here is for us that we're exploring is computer vision or image analytics. I mentioned it just before. Financial promotions, we don't systematically review every financial promotion at the moment. We tend to review those based on tip-off and staff concerns or some random sampling. There's actually no reason why we couldn't look at every financial promotion nowadays. So moving from just a sampling-based understanding of the world to a population review. And the other kind of big application for us here is in the web crawling and scraping space. So both as a kind of horizon scanning monitoring tool of who's selling what to whom and how is that being marketed and who are the new entrants into the market, particularly around kind of perimeter issues, areas where the product perhaps is unregulated but the service is regulated, those kind of issues where we want to have a good sense of who's doing what to whom on what kind of scale. Web crawling and web scraping are a big area of focus for us at the moment. To leverage that Clearly, we need to use things like NLP, natural language processing, to make sense of that data. But this is, again, a chance for us to look at actually what's happening across the totality of the market as advertised through the web, rather than us just doing that on a tip-off or sample basis. Right, I'm very short on time. I'm just going to use 1 more minute. Okay, just a summary of what we're interested in going forward. So there were 2 technologies that came up at our financial crime tech sprint that we do not know a whole lot about, but that look quite interesting in this domain. One is something called homomorphic encryption. I don't know how many people will know what this is. I will struggle to define it, but I'll have a go. Effectively, the ability to query encrypted data whilst leaving it encrypted and only unencrypting the result at the point that it's received by the executor of the query. So it allows, to make it real, it may, for instance, allow institutions to query each other's highly sensitive data and to only get back an unencrypted, effectively safe result from that query without ever having access to the underlying data. My mic has been cut now. Homomorphic encryption. The second is zero-knowledge proof, which is even harder to describe. I'm not actually going to attempt to do it right now, but effectively, again, looks an interesting technology in an era of things like GDPR, whereby firms could start to share useful information between themselves, particularly in a financial crime domain, without actually sharing the underlying data. So we're very interested in these 2 technologies and the various other pilots that I mentioned that are flying out of the tech sprint. These will be big areas of focus for us. Mentioned already this digital regulatory reporting and the pilots. They'll be running for about 6 months, and we'll also be publishing a feedback statement towards the end of the year on that. We have a task to build out our own cloud analytics platform. So we weren't all in on cloud years and years ago. We are just kind of making our move into cloud analytics. We've got some work to do there. We will continue our tech sprints. They seem to work well. They seem to be a useful tool. So our 6th tech sprint, probably relating to pensions, will be in the winter of this year. We're just narrowing that down at the moment. As I mentioned, the Global Sandbox, expect to hear some more about that in the coming weeks. And then I touched on it briefly earlier. We had this themed event on AI and machine learning and how to safely deploy them within financial markets. What are our expectations of explainability? How do we work through some of the ethics questions? How do governance frameworks apply in a machine learning world? These sorts of things. These are all very open, very interesting questions I think we in the industry need to work together to solve. So again, another area of focus for us. So hopefully useful. I'm massively over time. We'll try and play 3 roles: catalytic convener, engaged participant, and role model. I've given you a bit of a sense of how we're using these technologies, and then we're very interested in digital regulatory reporting and financial crime. That's it from me.
Nick, no, don't leave. I think you've given people such a lot to think about. Okay. Let's go into extra time for questions.
Okay.
So we have questions coming up from the audience here from the Slido, and anyone who wants a mic, we have 2 mic. There's a mic down here, please. So the first question, Nick, is what is the FCA's current view on the use of cloud technology to improve the ability to collect and analyse data globally?
Okay. So we put out some guidance on use of cloud by financial services firms in the UK. I think broadly, to be honest, we remain agnostic about whether it's cloud or on-prem. However, there are some governance considerations to consider when you're outsourcing something to the cloud. There was a big challenge actually around physical premise access. That was, I think, one of the barriers to a lot of firms utilising the cloud. So we've reclarified our expectations there, but we do expect you to be able to get decent quality, rapid versions of your data from your cloud provider when we request it. So it's quite simple. Providing you can get access to the data, and providing you've been through the governance frameworks that apply to your firm in terms of appropriateness of residency of the data, whether you can access it when you need to, whether the security controls meet the risk and complexity of your business. Providing you've been through those, we do not have an aversion to cloud. We ourselves are moving as much of our application estate onto cloud over the next few years as we can, which I suspect will end up being somewhere between 90 and 95% of our entire infrastructure will be on cloud.
Thanks. We'll take the question in the front row and then one more from the group. So please take the question
Yes,
here.
please. I have a legal background myself.
Sorry.
I have a legal
Yes.
background myself. I come from Spain, and there's something really worrying about all this. I wanted to ask you for your insight, because in my experiences in e-commerce and e-service, e-banking, you name it. Okay, the problem is when something goes wrong with computer programming, or imagine all these automated processes, when they are unable to solve something. Do you really think in a competitive world we are living, a globalized world we are living nowadays, that companies will be in a position to have employees capable of dealing with exceptions, with anomalies in the system, when systems don't work, when they got it wrong? Do you think they will be able to find those people, to employ those people, to train those people? I don't think so, I'm afraid. In my experience with e-commerce, e-banking, it doesn't work so far. So there's a lot of, perhaps machine learning will help. I don't know, but I find it very complicated indeed. Thank you.
Yeah, so I think right now there's probably not as much talent as the market requires. I think we're all competitively fishing in the same pools for talent right now. I think that the UK government, various other governments and academic bodies are piling money and I guess creating a huge amount of interest and demand for investment in STEM skills generally in the economy. I think there are some. It's difficult because I think some of the most cutting-edge applications of technology, we probably don't have as much of the talent as we require right now. But there's a lot that takes place in financial markets, whether it be within a regulator or within a regulated firm, that really isn't requiring of cutting-edge, deep learning type AI. It's just requiring some of the more basic supervised models. And there's a real debate, I think, to be had about how different is a highly supervised machine learning algorithm to the kind of credit risk models and things that have been developed for years in financial markets. So I think there is a challenge whether we've got enough of the cutting edge talent, and I think there will be an increasingly competitive market for that. And I think one of the ways we're going to solve for that is to work more collaboratively between ourselves and the industry and between industry participants. But I also think there's a risk that if we focus on not having the really cutting edge skills, we don't make all of the improvements that could be made with the more basic skills that are in abundance now.
Okay, thanks, Nick. I think that's all we've got time for. Big hand for Nick. Thank you very much.
Cheers.
Appreciate you coming in.